Danny Walsh had grease under his fingernails and a broken ventilation panel in his hands when he first heard the crying. The sound cut through the usual hum of orbital station meridian like a knife through silk. High-pitched, desperate, and getting worse by the second. He paused, one boot on the maintenance ladder, and listened. The VIP docking bay was supposed to be quiet. Rich folks and diplomats didn't like noise. They paid good money for silence and privacy, but this crying was neither quiet nor stopping. Danny climbed down and set his tools on the floor. His supervisor would yell at him for leaving a job half done, but something about that sound made his chest tight. He had a little sister back on Earth. He knew what a baby in distress sounded like. The crying came from around the corner, near the private landing platforms where ships worth more than his yearly salary sat gleaming under the station lights. Danny wiped his hands on his coveralls and followed the sound. What he found made him stop dead. A woman stood in the middle of the polished floor, holding a small bundle against her chest. She wore simple gray robes, but there was something about the way she held herself that screamed importance. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it, scales catching the light in shades of deep emerald and gold. A Draknari. Danny had seen a few during his 3 years on the station, but never up close. 2 guards flanked her, tall and armed, their faces hidden behind ceremonial helmets. They stood perfectly still, looking straight ahead like statues. The woman rocked the bundle in her arms, her movements jerky and frustrated. The crying got louder. Danny should have walked away. Protocol said civilians didn't approach VIPs without permission, especially not humans, especially not maintenance workers with grease stains on their shirts. But the baby's cry had changed. It wasn't just upset anymore. It sounded wrong, strained. He took 3 steps forward before one of the guards moved, hand going to the weapon at his belt. "Stop." The guard's voice crackled through his helmet speaker. Danny raised his hands. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. The baby sounds sick." The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were golden with vertical pupils that fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to step back. But he didn't. "You will leave," she said. Her voice was accented but clear. "This is not your concern." "Ma'am, I think something's wrong. Please, I work with environmental systems. I might be able to help." The woman's crest, a fan of delicate scales along her head, flared slightly. Anger, maybe, or offense. Danny wasn't sure. He didn't know much about Draknari body language. "Draknari do not accept interference with their young," she said, each word sharp as glass. "It is our way," the baby gasped. A horrible wheezing sound. Danny looked at the bundle in her arms and saw tiny fingers, scaled but delicate, turning slightly blue at the tips. His stomach dropped. "Your way is going to get your kid killed," he said, and immediately regretted it. "You didn't talk to important aliens like that. You definitely didn't talk to someone with armed guards like that." But the woman didn't signal her guards to throw him out. She stared at him, her golden eyes searching his face. "The baby wheezed again. What do you see?" she asked quietly. Danny pointed at the baby's fingers. "The blue color. That's oxygen deprivation. And listen to the breathing. That's not normal crying. The air mix in this bay is standard for humans and most species, but..." He looked around, thinking fast. "Draknari babies need higher humidity and warmth, don't they? This bay is climate-controlled for comfort, not for infants." The woman's expression shifted. Not quite trust, but something close to desperate hope. "Can you fix it?" she asked. "Let me try." She hesitated for one more second, then gave a sharp nod. Danny rushed to the nearest environmental control panel and pulled it open. His fingers flew over the settings. Temperature up 3 degrees. Humidity up 15%. He created a localized climate bubble, something the expensive VIP systems could do for picky passengers. Warm, moist air began to flow from the vents above them. For 10 seconds, nothing changed. The baby kept crying, kept gasping. Danny's heart hammered in his chest. What if he was wrong? What if he made it worse? Then the crying shifted, became stronger, clearer. The gasping stopped. The woman looked down at her child, then at Danny. The baby's fingers were returning to their normal color, a healthy jade green. Small lungs filled with air properly for the first time in who knew how long. "You saved her," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Danny let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I just changed the air. Any mechanic could have done it, but no one did. No one thought to try." The woman adjusted the bundle in her arms, and Danny caught a glimpse of a tiny face, reptilian but somehow still baby cute. with big golden eyes and a small crest that lay flat against her head. The baby was calming down, making soft cooing sounds now instead of cries. "What is your name?" the woman asked. "Danny Walsh, ma'am. Maintenance Division, 3rd shift." The woman studied him for a long moment. "I am Ashara. This is my daughter, Kess." Something in the way she said it made Danny think she was leaving something out, something important. But before he could think too hard about it, one of the guards leaned in and whispered something urgent in her ear. Ashara nodded, then looked back at Danny. "I must go, but I will not forget this." She turned and walked toward a ship Danny hadn't noticed before. It was sleek and beautiful, with curves that looked organic rather than manufactured. The kind of ship that probably cost more than the entire station. Danny stood there watching them board. Just before the ramp closed, Ashara turned back and met his eyes one more time. She placed her hand over her heart in what looked like a gesture of respect, then disappeared into the ship. The engines hummed to life, and the vessel lifted smoothly from the platform, gliding out through the atmospheric shield and into the black. Danny went back to his ventilation panel. His hands shook slightly as he picked up his tools. He had no idea who that woman really was, but something told him she was more than just another rich passenger. His communicator beeped. His supervisor, asking where he was and why the job was taking so long. Danny smiled and got back to work, thinking that was the end of it. Just a strange encounter, a good deed, something to tell his sister about next time they talked. He had no idea that in 3 days, his entire life would change. He had no idea that the woman he helped was the ruler of an empire spanning 12-star systems, and he definitely had no idea that the baby whose life he saved would become the reason humanity's reputation in the galaxy would shift forever. For now, Danny Walsh was just a mechanic with grease under his nails, finishing a repair job in a quiet corner of a space station, but the universe had other plans. 3 days after helping the Draknari woman, Danny received a message that made his blood run cold. The station commander wanted to see him immediately. He sat in the waiting room outside Commander Oaks's office, trying not to panic. His leg bounced nervously. The secretary, a Centaurian with 4 arms, ignored him completely while typing at multiple screens at once. Danny ran through everything he might have done wrong. The VIP bay incident had to be it. He broke protocol, approached without permission, messed with environmental controls that weren't his assignment. Maybe the woman filed a complaint. Maybe her guards reported him. His career on Meridian was probably over. The door slid open and Commander Oaks appeared, a broad-shouldered woman with gray hair tied back in a tight bun. Her expression was unreadable. "Walsh, get in here." Danny stood on shaking legs and followed her inside. The office was neat and sparse, with a view of the station's main docking ring through the wide window. Commander Oaks sat behind her desk and gestured for Danny to sit. He perched on the edge of the chair, ready for the axe to fall. "Do you know why you're here?" Oaks asked, the VIP bay. 3 days ago. "I broke protocol and I'm sorry, Commander. I just thought," Oaks held up a hand. "You thought a baby was in trouble and you helped. That about right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know who that woman was?" Danny shook his head. Oaks turned her monitor so Danny could see it. A news article filled the screen, written in 3 different languages. The headline in standard read, "Empress Ashara of the Draknari Empire concludes trade negotiations." Below it was a photo. The woman from the bay, but not in simple gray robes. She wore elaborate armor decorated with precious metals, her crest fully extended in regal display. She looked powerful, terrifying even. Danny's mouth went dry. "I helped an Empress?" "Not just any Empress. Ashara controls 12 systems and commands a fleet that could turn this station into scrap metal if she wanted. She was traveling quietly, minimal security, trying to keep a low profile for personal reasons." Oaks leaned back in her chair. Apparently, her daughter has had health issues. She was taking her to specialists on Orion Prime. "I didn't know. I swear I just heard crying and—" "Relax, Walsh, you're not in trouble." Oaks almost smiled. "In fact, you're probably the luckiest maintenance worker in the entire sector." Danny blinked. "Ma'am, Empress Ashara sent a formal communication to the station this morning. She requested to meet with you before her ship departs. She's leaving in 2 hours and she wants to speak with you personally." The world tilted slightly. Danny gripped the armrests of his chair. "She wants to meet me? Why?" I imagine she wants to thank you properly. The Draknari take debt seriously. You saved her daughter's life, Walsh. That's not something she'll ignore. Oak stood up. There's a shuttle waiting to take you to her ship. Don't keep an Empress waiting. 20 minutes later, Danny found himself in a small shuttle, still wearing his work coveralls because he didn't have time to change. The pilot, a young ensign who looked both impressed and terrified on Danny's behalf, said nothing during the short flight. The Draknari ship grew larger in the viewport. Up close, it was even more beautiful than Danny remembered. The hull seemed to shimmer like scales, and the design flowed in ways that human engineering could never quite match. This was a ship built by a civilization that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. The shuttle docked with a gentle thump. The airlock opened, and Danny stepped into a corridor that took his breath away. Everything gleamed. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings, and soft light came from sources he couldn't identify. It smelled like cinnamon and something else, something alien but not unpleasant. A Draknari servant, shorter than the guards but still tall by human standards, bowed slightly. "Follow, please." Danny followed through corridors that twisted and turned. He passed rooms filled with things he didn't recognize, technology mixed with art in ways that made it hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Other Draknari they passed stopped to stare at him. Some looked curious. Others looked disapproving. Finally, they reached a door that slid open to reveal a sitting room. Empress Ashara stood near a window that showed the stars beyond. She wore simpler clothes than in the news photo, but still far more elaborate than the robes from 3 days ago. Her crest was partially raised, relaxed but alert. She turned when Danny entered. The servant bowed and left, closing the door behind them. "Danny Walsh," Ashara said. She gestured to a chair. "Please sit." Danny sat, feeling completely out of place. The chair was designed for Draknari proportions and felt strange under him. Ashara remained standing. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did 3 days ago saved my daughter's life. I just adjusted the air, Your Majesty. It wasn't, do not diminish what you did." Her voice was firm but not angry. "My people have a saying, the simplest solution seen is worth more than the complex solution missed. My guards are trained warriors. My physicians are the finest in the Empire, but none of them thought to check the environment. You did?" Danny didn't know what to say to that. Ashara moved to a table and picked up a small box. "I wish to offer you compensation. Currency, technology, a favor to be called upon later. Name what you desire." Danny shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want payment, Your Majesty. I'm not trying to be rude, but I did what anyone would do. You don't owe me anything." Ashara's crest flattened slightly. Confusion, Danny guessed. "In my empire, debts are always repaid. To leave one unpaid is a grave dishonor. I understand that, but..." Danny struggled to find the words. "Where I come from, helping kids is just something you do. We don't expect rewards for it. It's just..." "Right." Ashara studied him for a long moment. "Tell me about human customs. When a child of strangers is in distress, what do your people do?" Danny thought about it. "We help. Doesn't matter whose kid it is. If a baby's crying or hurt or in trouble, you help. My sister taught kindergarten back on Earth, and she always said every child is everyone's responsibility in a way. Not legally or anything, just morally. Every child is everyone's responsibility," Ashara repeated slowly. "This is common among humans?" "Pretty common, yeah. I mean, there are bad people everywhere, but most folks would help a kid without thinking twice about it." Ashara walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Her reflection in the glass showed an expression Danny couldn't read. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "My daughter Kess has been ill since birth. Not seriously," the physician said. "Minor breathing issues, developmental delays, nothing life-threatening." She turned back to Danny. "But she was not thriving. I took her to specialists on 4 different worlds. They ran tests, prescribed treatments, adjusted her diet. Nothing helped significantly. And then you came to our station," Danny said. "And then a human mechanic with grease on his hands fixed in 2 minutes what my empire's best physicians could not fix in 6 months." Ashara's golden eyes locked onto his. "This troubles me, Danny Walsh. It makes me wonder what else my people are missing because we are too proud to see simple answers." She sat down across from him. The power dynamic shifted somehow. This didn't feel like an empress talking to a subject anymore. It felt like one person talking to another. "I have a proposal for you," Ashara said. "Come to my homeworld. Work in my palace. Help ensure that Kess's environment is always optimal. I will pay you well, provide excellent quarters, give you access to technology your people have not yet developed. Danny's mind reeled. Your Majesty, I'm just a mechanic. I fix air filters and heating systems. I'm not qualified to work in a palace. You are qualified to see what others miss. That is rarer than you think. Ashara reached into her robes and pulled out a small crystal that glowed with inner light. I will not force you to decide now, but if you change your mind, speak to this crystal. Say my name. It will reach me anywhere in the Empire. She stood, and Danny quickly stood as well. The meeting was over. Think about it, Ashara said. Your people have something my empire needs, even if I do not yet fully understand what that is. Perhaps it is your willingness to help without expecting reward. Perhaps it is your ability to see the simple solution. Either way, I believe you could do great good here. Danny took the crystal. It was warm in his palm, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I'll think about it, he said. Ashara placed her hand over her heart again. That same gesture of respect. That is all I ask. The servant appeared to escort Danny back to the shuttle. As he walked through those gleaming corridors again, his head spun with possibilities. Work in an alien palace? Leave the station? It was insane. But when the shuttle deposited him back at Meridian and he returned to his small quarters, Danny found himself staring at the crystal for a long time. Outside his window, Ashara's ship detached from the station and slipped away into the black, its engines leaving trails of light that faded like memories. Danny set the crystal on his desk and tried to go to sleep. He failed completely. 2 weeks passed before Danny made his decision, and they were the longest 2 weeks of his life. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering. The crystal sat on his desk, glowing softly in the dark of his quarters. Sometimes he picked it up, turned it over in his hands, felt its warmth, but he never spoke to it. During his shifts, he found himself researching the Draknari Empire on the station's public network. What he learned was both impressive and intimidating. The Draknari had been spacefaring for over 3,000 years. Their empire stretched across 12 systems with populations in the billions. They were known for their military strength, their artistic achievements, and their rigid social structure. Empress Ashara, he discovered, was considered a reformer. She had taken the throne young after her father's death and immediately started pushing for changes, trade agreements with younger species like humans, educational exchanges, modernization of old laws. The conservative faction in her government hated her for it. Danny also learned that the Draknari viewed family matters as intensely private. Parents alone were responsible for their children. Accepting help was seen as weakness. No wonder Ashara had been so conflicted about letting him assist with Kess. You've been distracted, said Rhea, his supervisor, during a break in the maintenance bay. She was a veteran spacer, 60 years old with cybernetic eyes that missed nothing. What's eating you? Danny hesitated, then told her everything. The encounter in the VIP bay, the meeting on the ship, the job offer. When he finished, Rhea was quiet for a long time. That's quite an opportunity, she finally said. It's crazy. I don't belong in a palace. I wouldn't know how to act, what to say. I'd probably cause some kind of diplomatic incident within a week. Rhea smiled. You know what I did before I worked on stations? I was a farm girl on a colony world, grew corn and raised chickens. Then I got hired to fix environmental systems on a cargo ship, and suddenly I was traveling between stars. She tapped her cybernetic eyes. Lost these in an accident on that first ship. Thought my career was over. Instead, I got better eyes and saw things I never would have seen back on the farm. What's your point? My point is that opportunities like this don't come twice. You helped someone without thinking about who they were or what you'd get out of it. Maybe that's exactly why she wants you there. You're not trying to impress anybody. You just do what's right. Danny stared at his hands, calloused from years of work. A scar across one knuckle from a sharp piece of metal, grease permanently embedded in the creases of his skin. Working hands. Honest hands. I'm scared, he admitted. Good, Rhea said. Means you're smart enough to know this is real. But don't let fear stop you from living. That evening, Danny made a call to Earth. The delay was frustrating, nearly 10 seconds each way, but hearing his sister's voice helped. So let me get this straight, Lisa said after he explained everything. An alien Empress wants to hire you because you were nice to her baby? Basically, yeah. Lisa laughed, bright and clear even through the static of the long-distance connection. Danny, that's the most you thing I've ever heard. Of course you'd accidentally befriend space royalty by being decent. I haven't said yes yet. Why not? You've been stuck on that station for 3 years. Mom and Dad are retired and happy. I've got my research position. Nobody here needs you to stay. She paused. Look, I know you're worried about being out of your depth, but you're always out of your depth and you always figure it out. Remember when they promoted you to senior mechanic and you were convinced you'd fail? I did almost fail. That plasma conduit nearly. But it didn't because you learned fast and worked hard. You'll do the same with this. Lisa's image on the screen softened. Go have an adventure, Danny. Help that baby. See what happens. After the call ended, Danny sat in the silence of his quarters. Outside the window, ships came and went from the docking bays, their engines flaring like small stars. How many of those ships were going to places he'd never see if he stayed here? He picked up the crystal. It was warm, always warm, pulsing with that gentle rhythm. Danny took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change his life. Empress Ashara. The crystal flared bright. Light filled the room and suddenly Ashara's image appeared above it, projected in perfect detail. She looked like she had been expecting his call. Danny Walsh, she said. Have you made your decision? I'll come, Danny said before he could change his mind. I'll help with Kess however I can. I don't know if I'll be any good at palace life, but I'll try. Ashara's crest rose slightly, a sign of pleasure he had learned to recognize. Excellent. I will send a courier ship to collect you. Can you be ready in 3 days? 3 days. Barely enough time to process what he was doing, let alone prepare properly. But Danny nodded. I'll be ready. Good, Packlight. Everything you need will be provided. Ashara paused. Danny, I want you to understand something. You will face resistance. Many in my court will not accept a human advisor, especially one of common birth. They will test you. Some may be cruel. I've dealt with difficult people before, Your Majesty. Not like this, but I believe you can handle it. Your honesty is your greatest strength. Do not lose it trying to fit in. Her image flickered slightly. I must go. The courier will arrive in 72 hours. Welcome to my service, Danny Walsh. The light faded. The crystal dimmed. Danny set it down and looked around his quarters. Small, functional home for 3 years. In 3 days he would leave it behind. He started packing. The next 72 hours blurred together. Danny filed his resignation, which Commander Oakes accepted with a knowing smile and a firm handshake. He sold most of his belongings to other station workers. He said goodbye to people he had worked with, some of whom thought he was crazy and said so. You're really going to work for the Draknari? Asked Pete, another mechanic. I heard they eat humans who disappoint them. That's not true, Danny said, though he wasn't entirely sure. Well, good luck anyway. Send a postcard. Rhea gave him a small toolkit, worn but well-maintained. Every mechanic should have good tools, she said. Take care of yourself, kid. On the morning of the 3rd day, Danny stood in the docking bay with a single bag of personal items and Rhea's toolkit. The courier ship arrived exactly on time, sleek and smaller than Ashara's vessel, but still obviously Draknari in design. The pilot was a young Draknari named Soren, who seemed amused by Danny's nervousness during the journey. First time leaving human space? He asked. First time leaving the station in 2 years, Danny admitted. You'll like Vrakas. The homeworld is beautiful. Dry but beautiful. The journey took 4 days, jumping through 2 different relay points. Danny spent most of it in his tiny cabin, reading everything he could about Draknari culture and trying not to panic. He was really doing this, leaving everything familiar behind to work in an alien palace because he helped a baby breathe. When they finally dropped out of the last jump, Vrakas filled the viewport. The planet was red. Deep crimson deserts stretched across continents broken by mountain ranges that looked like teeth biting at the sky. Cities glittered like jewels in the lowlands, and massive crystal formations jutted from the ground in geometric patterns that couldn't be natural. The crystals grow that way, Soren explained, seeing Danny's expression. They're alive in a sense. My people have built around them for thousands of years. The ship descended through the atmosphere. Heat shimmer distorted the view until they broke through into clear air. The palace came into view and Danny's breath caught. It wasn't built on a mountain. It was carved from one. The entire structure emerged from the rock face. Towers and walls and bridges all part of the living stone. Crystals grew from its peaks, catching the sunlight and throwing rainbows across the sky. Home of the imperial family for 80 generations, Soren said proudly. They landed on a platform that extended from the mountainside. When the ramp lowered, heat hit Danny like a physical force. Dry and intense, it made Earth feel cool by comparison. A servant waited at the platform's edge, an older Draknari female with a crest that had faded to pale green with age. She bowed slightly. "Danny Walsh, welcome to the Imperial Palace. I am Nira, head of household staff. Please follow me." Danny grabbed his bag and toolkit and followed her into the mountain. The corridors inside were cool despite the heat outside, carved from the same red stone as the exterior. Crystals embedded in the walls provided light. They passed rooms filled with servants, halls decorated with ancient weapons, courtyards open to the sky where strange plants grew. Other Draknari they passed stared at Danny, some openly, some trying to be subtle. He heard whispers in their language, words he didn't understand but could guess the meaning of. The human, the outsider, the one the Empress hired. Nira led him to a suite of rooms that made Danny's station quarters look like a storage closet. Bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, even a small workspace. Everything was sized for Draknari proportions, which meant the bed was huge and the ceilings were high, but it was comfortable. "Rest," Nira said. "Tomorrow you will meet with Empress Ashara and begin your duties. Is there anything you require?" "No, thank you. This is amazing." Nira's crest rose slightly, almost a smile. "Welcome to Vrakas, Danny Walsh. I hope you find what you seek here." After she left, Danny stood in the center of his new quarters and let the reality of it all sink in. He was on an alien planet in a palace about to start a job he had no idea how to do. Through the window, the red desert stretched to the horizon and twin moons rose in a sky that was subtly wrong shade of purple. Danny set down his bag, pulled out the toolkit Rhea gave him and held it like an anchor to everything familiar. Tomorrow his real work would begin. Tonight he just needed to breathe. Danny woke to sunlight the color of blood streaming through his window. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then memory crashed back and he sat up, heart pounding. Vrakas, the palace, his new life. A soft chime sounded at his door. Nira entered, carrying something draped over her arm. "Good morning, Danny Walsh. The Empress wishes to see you after morning meal. I have brought appropriate clothing." The outfit she laid out was simple but well made, somewhere between a uniform and casual wear. It fit surprisingly well, though Danny suspected the Draknari had scanned him at some point and tailored it to his measurements. Breakfast was brought to his room. Strange fruits he didn't recognize, some kind of grain porridge and a drink that tasted like spiced tea. He ate quickly, nerves making him hungrier than he expected. Nira returned to escort him through the palace. In daylight, the place was even more impressive. Servants moved through the halls on errands. Nobles in elaborate dress passed by with barely a glance at him, and guards in ceremonial armor stood at key intersections. They climbed a spiraling staircase carved from crystal and emerged into a tower room flooded with natural light. Empress Ashara stood near a window, and in her arms was Kes. The baby had grown. She was bigger now, her scales brighter, her eyes more alert. When she saw Danny, she made a chirping sound and reached toward him with tiny clawed hands. Ashara smiled, the first genuine smile Danny had seen from her. "She remembers you." Danny approached cautiously. Kes chirped again, louder this time. "May I?" he asked. Ashara handed her daughter over. The baby settled into Danny's arms with surprising ease, her small tail curling around his wrist. She looked up at him with those huge golden eyes and cooed. "She is better than she was," Ashara said. "The specialists on Orion Prime confirmed your diagnosis. Environmental factors were affecting her development. They made adjustments and she has improved significantly." She paused. "But there are still problems." Danny looked down at Kes. She seemed healthy to him, active and curious. "What kind of problems?" "Come, I will show you." Ashara led him deeper into the tower to a room that was clearly Kes's nursery. It was beautiful. Perfect even. The walls were carved with murals of Draknari legends. The temperature was precisely controlled. Soft light filtered through crystal screens. Medical equipment stood in the corners, monitoring every possible health metric. And it was completely silent except for the hum of machinery. Danny set Kes down in her sleeping cradle. The baby looked around, chirped once, then fell quiet. Her movements were sluggish compared to how active she had been in Danny's arms. "The physicians say she is healthy," Ashara said quietly. "All tests show normal development. But she is not thriving. She eats, she sleeps, but she does not play the way she should. She does not vocalize much. She seems empty. Danny walked around the nursery, his mechanic's instincts kicking in. He checked the environmental controls. Everything was perfect. Temperature, humidity, air composition, all exactly what a Dreknari infant needed. Too perfect. He had seen this before, in a different context. On the station, there was a hydroponics bay where they grew vegetables. At first, they had controlled everything perfectly. Every plant got exact amounts of water, light, and nutrients. The plants grew, but they were weak, tasteless. Then one of the botanists started varying the conditions slightly. Random fluctuations in temperature, changes in light patterns, slightly different watering schedules. The plants became stronger, more flavorful, more alive. "Can I ask you something, Your Majesty?" Danny said. "Of course, and how were you raised? When you were a baby, what was it like?" Ashara's crest rose in surprise. "That is an unusual question. Humor me." She thought for a moment. "I was raised in the old style, as were all imperial children before recent generations. In the lower levels of the palace, in rooms that connected to natural caves. My parents were present, but so were nurses, guards, servants. I remember many voices, many faces. And the temperature? It varied with the natural cycles of the mountain. Warmer during day, cooler at night. Why do you ask?" Danny gestured around the nursery. "This room is perfect. Completely controlled, completely safe, completely quiet. But maybe that's the problem." Ashara frowned. "I do not understand. On my station, we learned that living things need variation. They need stimulation, change. You can't grow something healthy in an environment that never changes." He picked up Kess again, and immediately the baby perked up, making soft sounds and grabbing at his fingers. "Look at her. She's more active now than she was in the cradle. Why? Because you are holding her? Because something is different. I smell different than you. I sound different. My heartbeat is faster. She's interested because I'm novel." Danny looked around the room again. "When was the last time someone other than you or a physician held her?" Ashura was quiet for a long moment. "It is not our custom. Parents care for their children alone. To allow others to handle an infant would be seen as neglecting duty. But is that how it was always done? You said you were raised with nurses and servants around. That was the old way. Modern thinking suggests that parental bonding is stronger when the child bonds only with their parents." Ashara's voice had an edge to it now. "Are you saying our modern understanding is wrong?" Danny chose his words carefully. "I'm saying maybe Kess needs what you had, variety, different voices, different people. Natural temperature changes instead of perfect control, sounds and textures and experiences that change day to day. You want me to make her environment less safe? I want you to make it more alive." Ashara took Kess back from Danny and held her close. The baby immediately became less active again, settling against her mother's familiar warmth. Not unhappy, but not excited either. "The physicians will never agree to this," Ashara said, "especially Lord Myron. He is the head of the Imperial Medical Council, and he has very strong opinions about proper childcare." "Can I meet him?" "That can be arranged." Ashara looked down at her daughter. "Danny Walsh, you have been here less than a day, and you are already challenging thousand-year-old customs. I hope you know what you are doing. So do I, Your Majesty." Within an hour, Danny found himself in a formal meeting room facing 5 Draknari physicians, with Lord Myron at their head. The Lord was old, his scales faded to pale gray, his crest elaborate with age markings that indicated high status. His eyes were sharp and deeply disapproving. "You are the human," Myron said. It was not a question and definitely not a compliment. "Yes, Lord Myron." "And you believe you understand Draknari infant development better than trained physicians?" "No, sir. I think I might see things from a different angle. That's all." Myron's crest flattened in irritation. "The Empress tells me you wish to change the Imperial Heir's nursery. Make it less controlled, less safe. This is foolishness. With respect, I don't think safety and stimulation have to be opposites. You think our methods are inadequate?" Danny took a breath. He had to be careful here. "I think your methods are based on what Draknari infants need physically. But maybe there's also what they need mentally and emotionally. Back on Earth, we learned that human babies need touch. Varied sounds, different people around them. When they don't get that, they develop problems. Not physical problems, emotional ones." "We are not humans," Myron said coldly. "No, But all intelligent species seem to have similar needs for social connection, especially when young. One of the other physicians, younger than Moran, spoke up. The historical records do show that imperial children were raised in more communal settings. Before the modern reforms, Myron turned on her. The old ways were inefficient and exposed children to disease and danger. Or maybe, Danny said, the old ways understood something we've forgotten. That safety isn't just about controlling the environment. It's also about preparing a child to handle an environment they can't control. The room went very quiet. Myron stared at Danny with something close to hatred. You overstep, human. You know nothing of our culture, our history, our needs. The Empress may have been charmed by your quick thinking in a crisis, but you are out of your depth here. Maybe I am, Danny admitted. But I know what I saw.
Kes is healthier when there's variation in her life.
When different people hold her. When things aren't perfectly controlled, you can dismiss that as ignorance if you want, but I'm just reporting what I observed. Myron stood, drawing himself to his full height. I will not endorse changes to the heir's care based on the primitive observations of a mechanic. If the Empress chooses to ignore expert advice, that is her decision. But do not expect support from this council. He swept from the room, the other physicians following. Only the younger one who had spoken earlier lingered for a moment. For what it's worth, she said quietly. I think you might be right. But Lord Myron has the Empress's ear on medical matters. Changing his mind will be nearly impossible. After she left, Danny sat alone in the empty meeting room and wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. He had been on Vrachis for less than a day and had already made enemies of the most powerful physicians in the Empire. That evening, Ashara summoned him again. She stood in her private chambers, still holding Kes, and her expression was troubled. Lord Myron came to see me, she said. He advised me to send you back to human space before you cause more disruption. Danny's heart sank. Are you going to? No, Ashara's crest rose. But I need you to understand what you are asking. If I implement your suggestions, I go against the advice of my own medical council. I risk my daughter's health on the theories of a human mechanic. If anything happens to Kes, it will be seen as my failure. I understand, Your Majesty. Do you? Because I am not certain you do. She set Kes in her cradle and turned to face Danny fully. I want to try your approach. My instincts tell me you are right. But I need you to be certain. Can you promise me this will help my daughter? Danny wanted to say yes. He wanted to give her the certainty she needed. But he was just a mechanic who noticed patterns. He wasn't a doctor or a scientist. He could be completely wrong. I can't promise, he said finally. But I can promise I'll do everything I can to help Kes, and if something doesn't work, we adjust. We learn, that's how you figure things out. Ashara studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Very well. We will try it your way. You have 1 week to show improvement. If there is none, or if Kes's health declines, we stop immediately. 1 week. I can work with that. Good. Because if this fails, it will not just be you who faces consequences. I will lose credibility with my council. My enemies will use this against me. The stakes are higher than you know. That night, back in his quarters, Danny couldn't sleep. He had 1 week to prove that his instincts were right. 1 week to help a baby he barely knew, in a culture he didn't understand, against the opposition of experts who had studied for decades. He thought about calling his sister, but the time delay would be maddening right now. Instead, he opened Ria's toolkit and found a note tucked inside. Trust yourself. You see things others miss. That's not luck. That's skill. Danny read it 3 times, then got up and started planning. He had work to do. Danny spent the first morning of his week gathering allies. He started with Nira, the head of household staff, who listened to his plans with an expression that was hard to read. You want servants to spend time with the imperial heir? Nira asked. Not just servants. Anyone willing. Guards, staff, even nobles if they're interested. I need people who can hold Cass, talk to her, just be present. Different people throughout the day. Nira's crest flickered. This goes against custom, I know. But the Empress has approved it. I'm asking for volunteers, not ordering anyone. To Danny's surprise, Nira nodded slowly. I raised 4 children of my own. They were always healthier when surrounded by family and friends. Perhaps the old ways had wisdom we have forgotten. She stood. I will ask among the staff. Some will refuse. Others may be curious enough to try. By midday, Danny had his first volunteers. A young cook named Thessa, who missed her own children back in the lower city. Two guards who had been present the day Danny first helped Kes and felt invested in her well-being. An elderly gardener named Oros, who claimed babies loved him and plants alike. Danny then turned his attention to the nursery itself. He started making changes, small at first. He adjusted the environmental controls to vary temperature slightly throughout the day, warmer in the morning, cooler at night, mimicking natural cycles. He brought in recordings of Dreknari natural habitats, the sounds of wind through crystal formations, distant calls of native animals. The physicians who monitored Kes watched these changes with obvious disapproval. But Ashara had given her permission, so they could only document and complain. On the second day, Thessa held Kes for the first time while Danny supervised. The cook was nervous at first, her hands trembling slightly. "What if I drop her?" Thessa whispered. "You won't. Just support her head and hold her close." Kes fussed for a moment, unfamiliar with Thessa's scent, then settled. The baby's eyes tracked the cook's face with interest. When Thessa started humming a working song from her childhood, Kes made a soft chirping sound Danny hadn't heard before. "She likes it," Thessa said, wonder in her voice. "She's interested. That's what we want." Word spread through the palace. The human was changing how the heir was cared for, and the Empress was allowing it. Some servants were scandalized. Others were curious. By the third day, Danny had 8 regular volunteers who rotated through the nursery, each spending an hour with Kes while Danny monitored her responses. The changes were subtle, but real. Kes began vocalizing more, her chirps and coos becoming frequent. She reached for objects with more enthusiasm. Her eyes followed movement better. She even smiled, or at least did something with her face that looked like the Dreknari equivalent. But Lord Mirren was not impressed. On the 4th day, he arrived at the nursery with his entourage of physicians. Danny was there with Oros, the elderly gardener, who was showing Kes a flowering plant from the palace gardens. "This is chaos," Mirren announced. "The heir is being passed between common servants like a toy. Where is the dignity? Where is the protocol?" Danny stood his ground. "She's a baby, Lord Myron. She doesn't need dignity. She needs interaction. You know nothing of what she needs." Myron gestured to his physicians. "We have documented your changes. Temperature fluctuations that could cause illness. Exposure to multiple individuals who could carry disease. Uncontrolled stimulation that could overwhelm her developing mind. Have you documented her increased vocalization?" Danny countered. "Her improved motor responses? The fact that she's sleeping better and eating more? Minor variations within normal parameters, meaningless." Oros, still holding Kes, spoke up in his creaky old voice. "I raised 12 grandchildren, Lord Myron. I know a thriving child when I see one." "This little one is happier than she was." Myron's crest flared in anger. "You dare speak to me, gardener?" "I dare speak truth. Age gives me that right." The confrontation was interrupted by Ashara herself, who entered the nursery with her guards. Everyone bowed except Danny, who had been told he didn't have to. "Lord Myron," Ashara said coolly, "I heard you were here. Is there a problem?" "Your Majesty, I must protest these dangerous changes. The heir's health is at risk." "Her health is better than it has been in months," Ashara replied. "I review the monitoring data every morning. Kes is thriving. You are not a physician, Your Majesty. With respect, you cannot properly interpret. I am her mother. I can interpret whether my daughter is happy." Ashara took Kes from Oros, and the baby immediately nuzzled against her, making contented sounds. She was listless before. Now she is vibrant. That is all the interpretation I need. Myron's expression hardened. "If you continue this course, I cannot be responsible for the consequences. The Medical Council will formally note our objections. Note whatever you wish. I support Danny Walsh's methods." After Myron left with his physicians, Ashara handed Kes to Danny and sighed. "I have made an enemy of the most powerful medical authority in the Empire. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Don't be. He needed opposition. He has grown too comfortable having his advice followed without question." She watched Kes grab Danny's finger and try to put it in her mouth. "How much longer until you are certain this is working?" 3 more days. If the improvements continue, I think we can say it's not just coincidence." The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. More volunteers came forward, including some younger nobles who found the whole thing fascinating. Danny created schedules, making sure Kes had variety, but not so much that she became overwhelmed. He added tactile elements to the nursery, different textures for her to touch. He even brought in other children, older ones who could be gentle so Kes could see social interaction. The 7th day arrived. Danny stood in the nursery early in the morning reviewing his notes. The data was good. Kes had hit 3 developmental milestones ahead of schedule. Her vocalizations had increased by 40%. She was more alert, more active, more engaged with her environment. But would it be enough? Ashara entered precisely at dawn, followed by Lord Myron and the medical council. She had arranged this final evaluation, a formal assessment to determine whether Danny's approach would continue or be abandoned. Lord Myron examined Kes thoroughly, using scanners and traditional methods. He took readings, made notes, conferred with his physicians. His expression gave nothing away. Finally, he straightened and addressed Ashara. The heir shows improved development across multiple metrics. I cannot deny the data. Danny felt a surge of hope. However, Myron continued, correlation is not causation. These improvements may have occurred regardless of the human's interference. In fact, I believe they are the result of the treatments we prescribed before he arrived, finally taking effect. Danny opened his mouth to protest, but Ashara raised a hand, silencing him. Lord Myron, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Do you truly believe that? Or are you simply unable to admit that a human outsider succeeded where you failed? The room went silent. Myron's crest rose in indignation. Your Majesty, I have served the imperial family for 40 years. And in those 40 years, how many times have you questioned your methods? How many times have you considered that perhaps the old ways contained wisdom you overlooked in your rush to modernize? The old ways were primitive. The old ways kept our species alive for thousands of years. Perhaps they deserve more respect than you give them. Ashara picked up Kes, who immediately cooed and grabbed her mother's crest. I am making a formal decision. Danny Walsh's methods will continue indefinitely. Furthermore, I am establishing a new position, Royal Environmental and Development Consultant. Danny will hold this position with full authority over the heir's care environment. Myron's face showed barely controlled rage. This is a grave mistake, Your Majesty. That is your opinion. My opinion is that my daughter is healthier and happier than she has been since birth, and I will not ignore that because it challenges your pride. Ashara's voice softened slightly. You are a skilled physician, Lord Myron, but you are not infallible. No one is. This human has shown me that accepting help is not weakness. It is wisdom. Myron bowed stiffly. If Your Majesty wishes to risk the heir's future on the theories of a primitive... Careful, Lord Myron. You are addressing my chosen consultant. Insult him again and you will find yourself removed from the medical council entirely. The threat hung in the air. Myron's crest flattened, a sign of submission. As you command, Your Majesty. After the medical council left, Ashara sagged slightly, the weight of confrontation showing. I have burned bridges today. You stood up for what was right, Danny said. In politics, those are not always the same thing. She looked down at Kes. But you are correct. This was right. My daughter is proof of that. Over the next weeks, Danny's role expanded. Word of the heir's improvement spread, and other Draknari families began requesting consultations. Nobles who had been skeptical now wanted to know about these human methods that seemed to work. Danny found himself advising on everything from nursery design to social development schedules. He trained staff members in what he was starting to call environmental enrichment. He gave talks to skeptical physicians who attended only because their patients demanded it. Not everyone was convinced. Lord Myron's faction remained opposed, spreading rumors that the improvements were temporary, that human methods would cause problems later, that this was all a dangerous experiment. But the results kept coming. Children raised with Danny's methods showed better social development, stronger emotional regulation, more curiosity about the world around them. The changes were small but measurable. 6 months after his arrival, Danny stood in the nursery watching Kes play with 3 other noble children her age. She was energetic and social, laughing as they tumbled over each other in the way young ones did. Ashara stood beside him, her crest raised in contentment. She is so different from when you first met her, Ashara said. She just needed the right environment. All kids do. You make it sound simple. It is simple. We just make it complicated. Danny smiled as Kes chirped at him from across the room. Kids need love, variety, and people who care. Everything else is just details. Ashara turned to face him. I have been thinking, Danny Walsh. Your methods have proven successful beyond my expectations. I wish to expand your role. What did you have in mind? I want to establish a formal council. Individuals from different species, different backgrounds, who can question our assumptions and offer new perspectives. You would help me build it. Danny was quiet for a moment. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when he first adjusted the air for a crying baby in a spaceport. That's a big job, Your Majesty. It is, but I believe you are suited for it. You see things others miss. You question without being disrespectful. You fix things. She smiled slightly. Besides, you said yes to coming here. Surely this is not so different. This is very different, but Danny watched Kess playing, healthy and happy. He thought about all the children who might benefit from simple changes in how they were raised. He thought about the future this could build. Okay, I'll try. But I stay hands-on. No pure politics. I'm still a mechanic at heart. I would expect nothing less. That night, Danny sat in his quarters and wrote a letter to his sister. The time delay meant it would be a week before he got a response, but he wanted to tell her everything. How he had gone from fixing air filters to advising an Empress. How a simple act of kindness had turned into something he never expected. Outside his window, the red desert stretched endlessly under twin moons. Somewhere below in the palace, Kess was sleeping soundly in a nursery that was alive with variation and warmth, and the presence of people who cared. Danny had come to Vrakas thinking he would help one baby. Instead, he was helping change how an entire empire thought about raising children. Not bad for a mechanic who just wanted to fix things. 1 year after Danny Walsh arrived on Vrakas, the palace gardens hosted an event that would have been impossible to imagine when he first stepped off that courier ship. Representatives from 7 different species gathered under a crystalline pavilion, brought together by an invitation from Empress Ashara herself. Danny stood near the back, uncomfortable in formal clothes that still felt strange after a year. He preferred his work attire, but Ashara had insisted. Today was important. Nervous? Asked Thessa, the cook who had become one of Danny's closest friends in the palace. Terrified, Danny admitted. What if this whole thing is a disaster? Then we learn and try again. Isn't that what you always say? Ashara took her place at the center of the pavilion, Kess sitting beside her in a specially designed chair. The baby, now a toddler really, looked around with bright, curious eyes. When she saw Danny, she waved enthusiastically. Friends and colleagues, Ashara began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Thank you for accepting my invitation. You are here because each of you represents a species that has joined the galactic community, and each of you has brought unique perspectives to our shared civilization. Danny listened as Ashara outlined her vision. A formal council of advisors from different species, tasked with examining Draknari practices and offering outside perspectives, not just on childcare but on everything from education to trade policy to cultural exchange. For too long, Ashara continued, we Draknari have assumed that our ancient civilization has all the answers, that our traditions are superior simply because they are old. But this past year has taught me differently. Sometimes the newest voice in the room sees what the oldest eyes miss. She gestured to Danny. A human mechanic saved my daughter's life twice, once with quick thinking in a spaceport, again with insights that challenged our most fundamental assumptions about childcare. He did not do this through superior technology or ancient wisdom. He did it through empathy, observation, and a willingness to question the way things have always been done. Danny felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. He resisted the urge to hide behind a pillar. This council I propose will operate on similar principles, Ashara said. Not to tell us what to do, but to ask us why we do it. To offer alternatives. To challenge us when we need challenging. If you choose to join, you will have my full support and protection. But I will not pretend this will be easy. You will face resistance from those who fear change. Are you willing? The first to speak was a Centaurian named Voss, her forearms crossed in thought. What authority would this council have? Advisory only, Ashara said. You would have no power to enforce decisions, but you would have direct access to me and my government. Your recommendations would be heard at the highest levels. And if we recommend something that contradicts Draknari tradition, asked a Velen named Kresh, his crystalline form catching the light, then we will have difficult conversations. But I would rather have difficult conversations than continue in comfortable ignorance. One by one, the representatives asked questions. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. Danny watched the discussion unfold, marveling at how far things had come from that day in the spaceport. A human diplomat named Patterson approached Danny during a break in the discussions. "Quite a journey you've had, Walsh. That's one way to put it. The embassy has been watching your work. You've done more for human-Draknari relations in 1 year than a decade of formal diplomacy achieved." Patterson smiled. "Though I'll deny saying that if anyone asks. I just tried to help a baby, and started a revolution in how an entire empire thinks about child development." "Don't sell yourself short." Patterson lowered his voice. "Between you and me, there are people back on Earth who want to replicate your methods. Your sister has been getting requests from early childhood education programs." Danny blinked. "Lisa, my sister Lisa?" "She's been advocating for what she calls species-inclusive developmental frameworks. Apparently you two talked a lot about your work here, and she saw applications for human children too. The idea that we can learn from how other species raise their young." Before Danny could respond, Ashara called everyone back to order. The discussions continued through the afternoon. By evening, 5 of the 7 representatives had agreed to join the council. The other 2 wanted time to consult with their governments. "This is a good beginning," Ashara said to Danny after the others had left. "Though I suspect the real challenges lie ahead. Lord Myron still isn't convinced?" "Lord Myron will never be convinced, but his influence is waning." Ashara picked up Kess, who had been playing with other children under Nira's supervision. "I have news that will concern him greatly. The Noble Assembly has requested you present your methods to their education committee." "The whole assembly?" 73 of the most powerful families in the Empire want to hear what a human mechanic has to say about raising children." "Yes." Danny's stomach dropped. "Your Majesty, I'm not qualified to address the Noble Assembly. You are the most qualified person in the Empire. You have results, you have experience, and you have something they need to hear." She shifted Kess to her other arm. "Besides, you won't be alone. I will be there. Nira will be there, Thessa, Oros, all the people who have worked with you. We believe in what you've accomplished." The presentation to the Noble Assembly was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Danny spent every free moment preparing, running through his notes, practicing his explanations. He kept it simple, focusing on results rather than theory. The day arrived. The assembly hall was ancient, carved from the living rock of the mountain like everything else in the palace. Tiers of seats rose in a semicircle, and every seat was filled. Nobles in elaborate dress wearing the colors of their houses, all staring down at the small platform where Danny stood. Lord Myron sat in a prominent position, his expression cold. Ashara introduced Danny, then stepped aside. He was on his own. "Thank you for inviting me," Danny began, his voice barely shaking. "I'm not a politician or a scholar. I'm a mechanic. I fix things. And when I came to Vrakas, I saw something broken." He activated the display behind him, showing data from Kess's first months. The flat developmental curves, the listless behavior, the medical concerns. The Imperial heir was healthy physically but struggling in every other way. The best physicians in the Empire couldn't figure out why. I looked at the problem like a mechanic, not at the baby herself but at her environment. He walked them through his observations, his changes, the results. He showed comparison data from children raised with traditional methods versus those raised with environmental enrichment. The differences were clear. "I'm not saying Draknari traditions are wrong," Danny said. "I'm saying maybe we lost something when we modernized. Your ancestors raised children in community settings with natural variation. We brought that back and it worked." A noble in the front row spoke up. "You claim these methods are better, but you have only 1 year of data. What about long-term effects?" "You're right to ask that. We don't know long-term effects yet, but we know current effects. Children are healthier, happier, more socially developed. Isn't that worth exploring further?" Another noble, this one older with an elaborate crest. "You are human. How can you understand what Draknari children need?" "I can't, not completely. But I can observe. I can ask questions. And I can care about outcomes more than being right." Danny paused. "That's what I'm asking you to do. Not to accept my methods blindly, but to test them. Try them with your own children. Measure the results. Make your own decisions based on evidence, not on who suggested the idea." Lord Myron stood. "The human speaks well, but he oversimplifies. Child development is complex. His methods may work for now, but they could cause problems we won't see for years. We cannot risk an entire generation on an experiment. With respect, Lord Mirren, Danny said. You've been running an experiment too. Modern childcare methods are only a few generations old. Before that, Draknari raised children differently for thousands of years. Which approach is really the experiment? The hall erupted in murmurs. Myron's crest flared in anger, but he couldn't respond without proving Danny's point. A younger noble stood, one Danny recognized as having adopted his methods early. I have 3 children. My oldest 2 were raised traditionally. My youngest has been raised with Consultant Walsh's approach. The difference is remarkable. My youngest is more confident, more curious, more socially capable. I support expansion of these methods. Others began sharing their experiences. Not all positive, but most were. Parents who had tried Danny's suggestions and seen improvements. Some who had concerns but wanted to learn more. The session lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Noble Assembly voted to formally endorse environmental enrichment as an acceptable alternative to traditional childcare, with provisions for continued study and monitoring. It wasn't a complete victory. Lord Myron's faction secured requirements for extensive documentation and oversight, but it was enough. As nobles filed out, some approached Danny to ask questions. Others congratulated Ashara on her foresight. A few still looked skeptical but willing to learn. You did well, Ashara told Danny later in the quiet of her private chambers. You spoke truth without arrogance. That is rare. I was terrified the whole time. Good speakers usually are. She smiled. The council is official now. Representatives have been confirmed from 6 species, with more expected. Your role will expand significantly. About that, Danny said. I've been thinking. I'm still just a mechanic, Your Majesty. Maybe you need someone more qualified to lead this council. Do you want to leave? No, but I want to make sure I'm the right person for this. Ashara walked to the window overlooking the desert. When you first helped Kess, you didn't ask if you were qualified. You didn't worry about protocol or proper procedure. You saw a problem and fixed it. That is exactly what this council needs. Someone who acts rather than deliberates endlessly. Someone who cares about results more than appearance. She turned back to him. I need you, Danny Walsh. Not because you're perfect or fully qualified, but because you're willing to try, willing to fail, willing to learn. That matters more than credentials. Kess toddled over to Danny and raised her arms. He picked her up automatically now, comfortable with the weight of her. Besides, Ashara added, Kess would never forgive me if I let you go. You are her favorite person in the palace. Danny looked down at the toddler in his arms. A year ago, she had been struggling to breathe, listless and underdeveloped. Now she was energetic, talkative, constantly curious about everything around her. The change was remarkable, and it had started with something so simple, adjusting the air, letting people help, trusting that old wisdom might still have value. Okay, Danny said. I'll stay. I'll help with the council, but I have conditions. Ashara raised her crest in amusement. You are negotiating with an Empress? You told me to be honest. So I'm being honest. I'll do this, but I stay myself. No titles I don't understand. No politics for politics' sake. And I keep working with kids. That's where this all started, and that's what matters most to me. Agreed. Anything else? Yeah, can we get more species involved? I've been reading about Valen childcare practices. They have some interesting ideas about sensory development. And the Centaurians have this whole approach to teaching through music that could work really well with... Ashara held up a hand, laughing.
Yes, Danny, we can involve more species.
In fact, I was hoping you would suggest it. Over the following months, the Council of Outside Perspectives grew. Representatives from 12 species eventually joined, each bringing their own cultural practices and insights. They met regularly, discussing everything from education to urban planning to healthcare. Not every suggestion was adopted. Not every meeting went smoothly. There were arguments, cultural misunderstandings, and occasional spectacular failures. But slowly, steadily, things changed. Draknari schools began incorporating environmental enrichment. Trade policies were adjusted based on suggestions from species with different economic structures. Even the military started consulting the council on how to better integrate soldiers from different worlds. And everywhere, children were raised with a bit more variation, a bit more community, a bit more of the old wisdom that had been nearly forgotten. Danny's role evolved. He was no longer just advising on childcare. He facilitated discussions, mediated conflicts, helped translate ideas between species that thought in fundamentally different ways. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. 2 years after that first meeting in the spaceport, Danny received a message from his sister. Video this time, which meant she had something important to say. Lisa's face appeared on the screen, grinning widely. "Hey, big brother. Remember how you said you were just going to help one baby? Well, funny story. The Early Childhood Development Coalition on Earth has officially adopted what they're calling Walsh-Ashara Principles for Inclusive Childcare. They're using your methods, Danny. Children across human space are benefiting from what you figured out on an alien world." Danny watched the message 3 times, unable to quite believe it. That evening, he stood in the palace gardens with Kes, now almost 3 years old. She chased after glowing insects native to Vrakis, her laughter echoing off the crystal formations. Thessa joined him, bringing spiced tea she knew he liked. Thinking deep thoughts? Thinking about how weird life is. A year ago, I was fixing ventilation systems. Now I'm apparently influencing childcare policies across human space. You're still fixing things, just bigger things. Maybe. Danny watched Kes catch an insect, examine it carefully, then let it go. You know what the strangest part is? I never wanted to be important. I just wanted to help. Those often go together, Thessa said. The people who chase importance rarely achieve it. The people who chase helping others become important without meaning to. Ashara approached through the garden path, her robes flowing behind her. She had just come from a council session and looked tired but satisfied. "We have approved the first joint educational program," she announced. Draknari children will study alongside human, Valen, and Centaurian children on 3 different worlds. It begins next year. Danny smiled. "That's amazing, Your Majesty. It is your work as much as mine, perhaps more." She sat on a nearby bench watching Kes play. "I have been thinking about the future, about what happens when I am no longer Empress. Will these changes last, or will the next ruler undo everything we have built? I don't know," Danny admitted. "But you're making it normal. The longer these methods work, the harder they'll be to reverse. In another generation, kids who grew up this way will be adults. They'll remember that diversity and openness made them stronger." "I hope you are right." Kes ran over to them, holding out a crystal flower she had picked. "Look, Mama. Look, Danny." Ashara took the flower gently. "It is beautiful, little one. It's for you," Kes said. "Both of you. Because you're my favorite people." Danny felt something warm in his chest. This child who had struggled to breathe, who had been listless and withdrawn, was now vibrant and loving and curious about everything. Whatever else happened, whatever politics or resistance they faced, this was real. This mattered. "Thank you, Kes," he said. The little Draknari beamed at him, then ran back to chase more insects. "She will be Empress someday," Ashara said quietly. "The first ruler raised with these new methods, or old methods, depending on how you see it. Either way, she will lead differently than I did, than my father did. Because of you, Danny Walsh. Because you were willing to accept help," Danny corrected. "That was the hard part. I just adjusted some air. You did much more than that. You taught an empire to question itself, to accept that wisdom can come from unexpected places. That strength is not about having all the answers, but about knowing when to ask for help." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Kes play as the twin moons rose over the desert. The palace around them hummed with life, servants and nobles and visitors from a dozen worlds all moving through its ancient corridors. Danny thought about that day in the spaceport, how he had heard crying and followed it without thinking, how one simple decision to help had cascaded into all of this. He had no way of knowing then where it would lead, no way to predict that adjusting environmental controls for a struggling infant would eventually change how multiple species thought about raising children. Life was strange that way. The biggest changes often started with the smallest actions. "Your Majesty," Danny said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. That first day in the spaceport, you could have refused my help. Your guards could have stopped me. Why did you let me approach?" Ashara considered the question. "I saw something in your eyes. Genuine concern, no agenda. You were not trying to gain favor or curry political advantage. You simply wanted to help my daughter." She smiled. "Also, Kes was turning blue and I was desperate. Desperation makes us willing to try things we might otherwise refuse. I'm glad you were desperate then. So am I." Kes came running back, this time with Oros, the gardener, following at a more sedate pace. The old Draknari had become something like a grandfather figure to the imperial heir, spending hours with her in the gardens, teaching her about plants and patience. "Time for evening meal, little sprout," Oros said. "Say goodnight to your mother and Danny." Kes hugged Ashara first, then turned to Danny and wrapped her small arms around his legs. "Good night, Danny. Tomorrow you teach me about the stars again? If your mother says it's okay." "Of course," Ashara said. Learning is always okay. After Kes left with Oros, Danny stood to go as well. But Ashara stopped him. "One more thing, Danny. I'm hosting a formal banquet next month. Leaders from all the worlds in our empire, plus ambassadors from human space and several other civilizations. I want you there at the high table as my guest of honor." Danny's immediate reaction was to refuse. He hated formal events, hated being the center of attention, but he saw the look in Ashara's eyes and understood. This was not just about honoring him, it was a statement. A human mechanic seated at the Empress's right hand sent a message about what the Draknari Empire valued now. "I'll need new clothes," he said. "These formal outfits still don't fit quite right." Ashara laughed, the sound light and genuine. "We will have something made properly. You have earned the right to look the part, even if you still feel like a mechanic underneath. I'll always be a mechanic underneath." "Good. Never lose that. The moment you start thinking of yourself as important is the moment you stop being useful." Danny returned to his quarters later, feeling the weight of the day settling over him. He looked around the rooms that had become his home. Still too large, still decorated in Draknari style, but familiar now. Comfortable. On his desk sat Ria's old toolkit, still used regularly for small repairs around the palace. Beside it was the communication crystal Ashara had given him, now dormant but kept as a reminder. And next to that, a new addition, a small hologram projector his sister had sent, showing images of children on Earth learning through the methods he had helped develop. Danny activated the projector. Images cycled through. A classroom where human children worked alongside visiting Draknari students. A playground designed with environmental enrichment principles. Teachers from 3 different species collaborating on lesson plans. His work here had rippled outward in ways he never expected, and it kept growing. There was a soft knock at his door. Nira entered carrying a datapad. "The council agenda for next week," she said. "They want your input on educational exchange programs." Danny took the pad, scanning through pages of proposals and questions. Each one represented hours of work, discussions, compromises between different species and cultures. "This is going to take all night," he said. "Probably," Nira agreed. "But that is the job you chose. I didn't choose this. I just helped a baby. And now you help thousands of babies across multiple worlds. Funny how these things work." Nira headed for the door, then paused. "For what it is worth, Danny Walsh, you have earned your place here. Not everyone sees it yet, but they will."
Give them time. After she left, Danny settled in to work through the agenda.
Outside his window, the desert stretched endlessly, and above it, the stars shone in patterns both familiar and strange. Somewhere out there was Earth, his home, his family, a life he could have kept living, safe and predictable and small. He did not regret leaving it. Because here, on this alien world in a palace carved from stone, Danny Walsh had found something he did not know he needed. Purpose that went beyond fixing broken machines. Connections that crossed species and cultures. The knowledge that one person, acting from simple compassion, could change more than they ever imagined possible. He thought about Kes, sleeping soundly in a nursery designed for growth and wonder. She would grow up different from any Draknari Empress before her. Comfortable with other species. Open to new ideas. Raised by a community rather than in isolation. And someday when she ruled, she would remember that her life was saved twice by someone who was not Draknari, not noble, not powerful. Just a mechanic who cared enough to help. That would matter. That would shape how she led. Danny smiled and returned to his work. He had a council meeting to prepare for, children to help, and an empire to gently push toward a future where wisdom came from everywhere and everyone. It was a big job for a mechanic from a space station. But then again, the biggest things often were. The human who had stepped forward in a spaceport to help a crying baby had become a bridge between worlds. Not through grand gestures or political maneuvering, but through the simple insistence that when something was broken, you fixed it. When someone needed help, you helped. The galaxy was vast and complex and full of species with different ways of thinking, but some truths were universal. Children needed love, variety, and community to thrive. Everyone benefited when different perspectives worked together. And sometimes the most important thing you could do was the obvious thing that everyone else had overlooked. Danny Walsh, mechanic and accidental revolutionary, worked late into the night under alien stars, fixing problems one at a time and building a future where every child, no matter what species, had the chance to reach their full potential. It was not the life he had planned. It was better.